Hey everybody, Professor Wills here, Pasadena City College. Well, we're continuing our examination of Gothic architecture, and I've got two extraordinary examples of chapel architecture that really show the possibilities when these Gothic innovations that we've talked about that allow this incredible soaring verticality to take place, this transcendent light, this heavenly light, thanks to their mastery of stained glass artistry, but also just the ability to create something structurally strong but skeletal-like that dissolves the wall, allowing more of those beautiful, colorful windows to replace them, essentially giving you the experience of standing inside a kaleidoscope in terms of light and color. This is what I want to share with you today. So our first stop is in France, of course, where so much of the Gothic innovations took place, and then we'll pop over to England to see what's happening there. But back in the 14th century, there was a king by the name of Louis IX who built a chapel by the name of Sainte-Chapelle, and it was right next to his palace, and it was built to house a real coup in terms of relics. Now, we talked a lot about relics in the Romanesque period, how those were, what attracted people to all of those pilgrimage churches, were, the best of the best relics from various saints and holy figures that people wanted to connect with, some kind of physical remnant of their existence. And so King Louis happened to get, supposedly, although many people believe this to be true, but the crown of thorns worn by Jesus and other relics associated with this period, associated with Christ's passion. So really iconic stuff. And so this chapel was built in the Gothic world of France to house these relics. Now, Louis is pretty interesting. He's, not surprisingly, was a crusader. He had two, unfortunately, failed crusades, the latter which in North Africa, Tunisia, where he lost his life. But he was a generous king. He contributed a lot to monastic orders. He respected piety and self-sacrifice and deprivation to honor God. He established foundations and charities, and was able to kind of settle a lot of disputes between the feudal barons of France and even his archenemy, the former archenemy of France, England, at least for a while. And so it allowed a real economic boom in France that, of course, where there's a good economy, the arts flourish. And this is what we see with Sainte-Chapelle. So without further ado, I'm going to minimize myself, get that PowerPoint up for you, and let's take a look at what I'm talking about. All right, so here's an exterior image of Sainte-Chapelle in present-day Paris, dating from 1243, oops, typo, to 1248. That's just what it should read here. But you can see, again, that sense of very Gothic verticality. It's got an enormous rose window, but we're not focusing so much on the architectural elements like we did with Notre Dame and even Chartres Cathedral. Of course, in Chartres, we really examined their beautiful, the examples of incredible, massive stained glass windows, especially rose windows. Here in this view of the upper chapel of the interior of Sainte-Chapelle, you can see what I'm talking about in terms of this sort of kaleidoscope-like experience. So despite the damage to poor Sainte-Chapelle during the French Revolution, most of the glass is original to the 13th century, which is astounding the amount of time it has survived, because for those of you who've lived in any home, usually there's a window that gets cracked by a ball or something along the way. But yes, we know that even France has had tumultuous history, and yet this place and its incredible stained glass endures. So we're looking at windows that are 49 feet in height, some of them 15 feet in width, just absolutely very large in scale, the largest stained glass windows ever made up to this point in art history. So these enormous panes of glass are housed within a veritable skeleton of structure, essentially mullions, which form these sort of long stone framing for these windows. You can see some of the mullions right here. Overall, this aesthetic is part of a sub-style that you find in France associated with this period of the 13th century Gothic world called the Rayonnant. And I'll put that term up on Canvas for you. It'll be here in the subtitles as well. So rayonnant style means radiant, radiant. And so that seems very appropriate to the luminosity and light that these stained glass windows bring into this particular sanctuary. It's a style, the rayonnant style, associated with King Louis. It's also characterized by an elegance, a refinement. We're not seeing any of that bulky structural look that we might have seen at Durham Cathedral in England, for instance. Remember those big, enormous thick columns, decorative for sure with their use of pattern, but we don't see that kind of bulkiness described or integrated into Sainte-Chapelle. It's more known for its lightness, its delicacy, and of course the surround of windows really convey that as well. But the rayonnant style can also translate not only to the windows but to few later churches or concurrent churches of the Gothic world, where you find perhaps elegant Gothic stonework like gables, buttresses, window tracery on the exterior. So it's not just limited to the interior as well. Here's another shot here of Sainte-Chapelle with some tourists taking pictures. But again, you can see that surround of incredible windows bringing in this sort of beautiful, radiant, violet colored light into that space. And again, just like we talked about in some of our early Christian and Byzantine examples, light is so important to give you that transcendental spiritual experience and connection to heaven, along with soaring verticality. Here's another shot for you to appreciate the beauty of Sainte-Chapelle, the little string quartet playing down below to give you a sense of scale. Alrighty, it's hello again, on to the Chapel of Henry VII. This is a chapel that's part of Westminster Abbey over in England, in London, and it too, reflects many of the, soaring verticality and innovations of the Gothic architectural age. But what it has in common with Sainte-Chapelle is a love of stained glass as well. So let me show you a little bit, or explain to you a little bit more what I'm talking about here. In tandem with a surprise element, that sweeping verticality takes your eye too. That is a wholly Anglo innovation that you find at this really kind of late period 16th century example of Gothic architecture. So there's our exterior view. Boom, this is our interior view here. So not only do we have incredible stained glass windows of enormous size and scale, and again, because of the innovations of the pointed arch and the Gothic rib vaults and buttressing, we are, this soaring verticality is possible, and allowing them to dissolve the walls, insert the beautiful stained glass, etc. We've talked about that a lot before. But what you find also is something called fan vaults. Fan vaults, that's another element you find at the Chapel of Henry VII, associated or part of the complex of Westminster Abbey in London. So what's interesting about King Henry VII, if you are interested in little royal trivia, he was the father of the inimitable Henry VIII, the king who was famous for being dissatisfied with his wives and chopping off their heads and replacing them in short order. But his dad, Henry VII, is the king associated with this Gothic gem. So yes, sure, the stained glass is phenomenal when seen inside this chapel. But again, it takes your eye to something perhaps even more extraordinary. And it's this sort of delicate array of fan vaults that seemingly blossom above our heads in a lace pattern-like design that's made, even rivals perhaps the abstract designs we studied from the Hiberno-Saxon illuminated manuscript tradition. So this is not an example of Rayonnant style that's associated with France. It is something called English perpendicular style. So again, sort of a sub-style of the overall Gothic world, where architectural design has an emphasis on the verticality of decorative elements. So essentially vertical details, especially long linear ones, dominate over horizontal ones, sending our eyes upward, and that's exactly the idea with Henry's chapel. So again, you see these compound piers supporting something very English, these English fan vaults, which are vaults that spring from these radiating ribs, and they form, again, this sort of fan-like pattern that decorate the ceiling of this particular chapel. So gazing upward, one wonders if we're looking at a series of, open umbrellas that have only their kind of, support framing left and the canopy's gone away, or are they, umbrellas made of pure lace? Is it some kind of, have we been transported to some kind of ancient underwater coral forest that we're looking up at a canopy of incredible coral organic design? It's got this porous quality, it's multi-dimensional, as these cone-like pendants project downward, almost like hanging lanterns or stalactites in, caves. And we talk about a throwback to our first unit on the cave art at Lascaux, and the stalactites among the cave galleries of bulls and other animals, right? But I mean, look how far we've come in the innovation of mankind in artistic expression, how you take certain elements, certain possibilities because of the Gothic world, the real skyscraper-like heavenly palaces of these Gothic cathedrals, and, in a very small chapel compared to, the big mega churches of the Gothic world, you have something quite extraordinary with this sense of the perpendicular style, the emphasis on verticality emphasized by it, but in such a very delicate way, and of course expressed in this incredibly complex vaulting called the English fan vault. I know we thought those 6- and 7-part vaults and 8-part vaults were complex. Now we have something all together blasting that out of the water in terms of a wondrous architectural achievement. So there you have it. Next up, we're going to move on to take a look at Gothic architecture, so stay tuned, or Gothic sculpture, so stay tuned for that lecture coming up next as we see the return of naturalism, thanks to the Greco-Roman world. All right, thanks for joining me.